Okay, let's unpack this. Artificial intelligence, especially these large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT, well, they've really woven themselves into our daily lives, haven't they?
Absolutely, from how we work to how we learn.
Right. You've probably used it, for brainstorming, drafting emails, maybe even helping with a tricky essay. But have you ever stopped to wonder what that immediate convenience, that sort of quick fix, might actually cost your brain in the long run?
And that's the crux of it. Because while these tools offer, well, unprecedented capabilities, there's this complex duality.
Duality, yeah.
Are we just boosting our productivity, or are we maybe inadvertently contributing to a kind of, well, the term they use is cognitive atrophy. It's a pretty important question, especially for learning.
Exactly. That duality is precisely what we're looking at today. And we're not just speculating, we're diving deep into a really groundbreaking study. It's titled Your Brain on ChatGPT: Accumulation of Cognitive Debt When Using an AI Assistant for Essay Writing Tasks.
Right, from researchers at MIT Media Lab and Wellesley College.
And what makes this study so compelling, I think, is they didn't just ask people, what they thought was happening. They actually measured their brain activity using EEG.
Yeah, EEG data.
Yeah.
Plus, they analyzed the essays themselves with natural language processing, NLP,
Yeah.
and did extensive interviews. It's a really multi-layered approach.
Mm-hmm.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, this study
Mm-hmm.
sort of serves as a preliminary guide, but a really profound one for understanding the cognitive and practical impacts of AI in learning environments.
So our mission today.
Our mission today, yeah, is to help you understand what's actually going on in your brain when you use these tools for learning. What are the surprising trade-offs? And what does it mean for how you approach information in this, new AI-driven world?
Get ready for some aha moments, I think, about maybe your own cognitive habits.
Definitely.
So the researchers designed this brilliant experiment to really get at how different tools impact our cognitive processes. Can you walk us through the setup? How did they do it?
Absolutely. So they had 54 participants, and they divided them into three distinct groups for the first three sessions. Everyone was tasked with writing essays based on SAT prompts.
Okay, SAT prompts. What were the groups?
Right. First, the LLM group. They only used ChatGPT. Then, the search engine group, who just used traditional web search, Google, presumably.
The old-fashioned way.
Sort of, yeah. And finally, the brain-only group. No external tools at all, just relying completely on their own knowledge, their own internal processing.
Okay, so everyone gets, what, 20 minutes to write an
Yeah,
essay?
20 minutes, yeah. On topics like loyalty, happiness, choices, those kinds of broad SAT themes.
Sounds straightforward enough for the first bit. But then you mentioned session 4 got really interesting. What was the critical twist there?
Session 4. This is where it gets clever. They took a subset, 18 participants from the original groups, and they switched their tools.
Switch them. How?
So the folks from the LLM group, they were asked to write without any tools. We'll call them LLM to brain. And conversely, the brain-only group participants, they were suddenly given access to the LLM, so they became the brain to LLM group.
Ah, I see. So you can see what happens when you gain or lose the AI.
Exactly. This setup allowed them to observe these cognitive shifts directly. And crucially, the prompts were personalized based on topics they'd already written about. So it allowed for a really direct comparison of their writing and presumably their thinking.
And beyond just the essays, what other kinds of data were they pulling in to get the full picture?
Right. It wasn't just the essays. They used electroencephalography, EEG, to measure brain signals,
Yeah.
Electrical activity.
Like brainwaves.
Exactly. Then natural language processing, NLP, to analyze the essays themselves, looking for quantitative things, qualitative things, structure, vocabulary, specific phrases, that sort of stuff.
Okay.
And finally, really comprehensive post-assessment interviews with participants after every single session to capture their subjective experiences.
So EEG, NLP, interviews, a real multimodal approach.
Yeah, give that holistic view, looking at the cognitive costs and benefits.
All right, so with that really ingenious setup, what did the participants actually report about their experience? Let's start with something super basic but fundamental, remembering what you actually wrote. How did they do quoting their own essays?
This was honestly one of the most striking behavioral differences. For the LLM group, the ChatGPT users, in session 1, a massive 83% said they had difficulty quoting from their essay.
83%.
And get this, none of them provided correct quotes in that first session. 0.
Wow.
And this problem didn't just disappear, it persisted. By session 3, 6 out of the 18 in that subgroup still couldn't quote correctly.
So it wasn't just a first-time thing.
No. And it strongly suggests a much shallower encoding of the content they produced with the AI's help. Their brains just weren't laying down the same kind of deep memory traces.
That's wild. It really does sound like that Google effect they talk about, but maybe turbocharged for LLMs. You remember that the AI generated it, or maybe where the file is, but not the actual substance?
Precisely. And it points to this critical insight for anyone learning, right? That convenience in generating content might come at the cost of deep encoding. That's the very neurological process our brains use to truly learn something, to retain it, to make it our own.
So how did the other groups compare on quoting, the search engine and brain-only folks?
Oh, stark contrast. Both the search engine and the brain-only groups. They showed near-perfect quoting ability by session 2, and by session 3 it was 100% accuracy, maybe with just tiny deviations.
So their brains were clearly doing that heavy lifting, internalizing the material.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you're not encoding it deeply, what about the feeling of ownership? Did people feel like the essays were truly theirs?
Yeah, that perception of ownership was also really nuanced. The brain-only group, as you'd expect, almost unanimously claimed full ownership, like 16 out of 18 in session 1, rising to 17 out of 18 by session 3.
Makes sense. It was all them.
Totally. But the LLM group, they presented this really fragmented, almost conflicted sense of authorship. Well, some claimed full ownership, sure, but others explicitly denied it. And many just assigned partial credit to themselves, somewhere between, say, 50 and 90%.
So like I edited it, but I didn't really write it.
Kind of, yeah. It suggests this diminished sense of cognitive agency because they delegated the actual content generation. They felt less like the author, maybe more like a director or editor.
And the search engine group, where did they fall?
They were more stable, but still less certain than the brain-only group. They often reported partial authorship too, maybe in the 70 to 90% range. They used external info, but still felt they did the weaving together.
That fragmented ownership with the LLM group is really fascinating. It makes you wonder, right? If you don't feel it's truly yours, does that affect your motivation to really refine it or even your pride in the final piece?
That's a great question.
So how did all this translate into satisfaction? Were they happy with the essays they produced?
Interestingly, yeah, satisfaction levels were generally pretty high across all the groups.
Oh, really? Even the LLM group?
Mostly, yeah. The search engine group was actually fully satisfied in all sessions, 18 out of 18. The LLM and brain-only groups were mostly satisfied too, just a few reporting partial satisfaction.
So satisfaction doesn't necessarily track with deep ownership or maybe even the cognitive effort involved.
It seems not, or at least not directly. You can be happy with the outcome, even if you feel you didn't fully create it yourself.
And what about their own words? The interviews must have revealed a lot. What did they say about using these tools?
Oh, the interviews provide crucial qualitative insights. For the LLM group, yeah, initially, many liked ChatGPT for linguistic help. Good sentences for transitions, grammar checking, that kind of thing.
The polish.
The polish, exactly. But many also found the output a bit robotic. They felt they had to go in and personalize it, add their own voice, and some definitely grew skeptical over time, concluding it was maybe not worth it for creativity, or that it was unreliable for finding actual sources, and ethical discomfort was common too. People admitting things like, it feels like cheating.
Yeah.
And one participant specifically noted, long sentences make it hard to memorize, which ties back to that quoting problem.
Interesting. And the other groups?
The search engine folks saw web search as a kind of good balance, good for research, checking grammar, but they often integrated personal stories more readily.
Yeah.
The brain-only group. They really emphasized autonomy, authenticity.
Yeah.
One participant said their essay felt very personal because it was about my own experiences. Another just liked not using any tools because I could just write my own thoughts down. That directness.
You can feel that sense of connection to their own work.
Right.
So how did these perceptions and the quoting ability shift in that crucial session 4 when the tools got swapped?
Right. Session 4, participants who had been using the LLM to brain group, they really struggled with quoting when they were forced to write on their own.
So that lack of deep encoding came back to bite them.
It really seemed to. It reinforces that idea. But here's a surprising finding. Almost all participants from both the reassigned groups actually preferred the essay they wrote in session 4.
Wait, preferred the session 4 essay regardless of whether they gained or lost the tool?
Yeah, they preferred their current essay to the ones they'd written before the switch.
Huh. Even the ones who went from LLM to brain only and found it harder.
Even them. Participants from that LLM to brain group said things like, I think this essay without ChatGPT is written better than the one with ChatGPT. They acknowledged ChatGPT might be better for just completion, getting it done fast.
Right.
But they felt the Session 4 essay, their own work, was better in terms of detail. Another said they were able to add more and elaborate more of my ideas and thoughts.
So a recognition maybe of higher quality or at least a stronger personal connection in their own unassisted work, even if it felt harder to produce at the time.
It seems that way, a sense of genuine creation, perhaps.
Okay, so we've heard what the participants said, we've seen their self-reports, but what about the objective data from the essays themselves? Did the tools leave like a distinct fingerprint on the writing that could be picked up by NLP?
Oh, absolutely. The NLP analysis turned up some fascinating patterns. First off, essay homogeneity.
Homogeneity, meaning they were all similar.
Exactly. The LLM group produced essays that were statistically very similar to each other within each topic, significantly less deviation compared to the other groups. It suggests the AI is kind of converging on a generic, maybe optimal, but less varied output.
And the brain-only group?
Strong variability.
Yeah.
People approach the same topic in very different ways, showing real individual thought processes.
Makes sense. What else?
Named entities, NARs. Those are specific things like people's names, places, years, definitions.
Okay.
The LLM group used the most specific named entities. The search engine group used about half as many. And the brain-only group used 60% fewer than the LLM group.
So the AI injects a lot of specific factual-sounding details.
It seems so. Whereas the human-only writing might be more conceptual, less reliant on pulling in external data points like that.
Interesting. And what about common phrases, the engrams?
Yeah, engrams, common sequences of words, also showed unique patterns. Like a phrase perfect society was used by all groups, but the search engine group used it most. LLM less. Brain only the least. The LLM group showed a real bias for things like third-person address forms, very formal, and specific phrases like choose career. And sometimes weird stuff in the loyalty topic. One LLM essay randomly included Colorado Springs.
For no reason.
No apparent reason. It just shows the AI generates what's statistically probable based on its training data, not necessarily what's contextually relevant or logical.
A glitch in the matrix?
Kind of. The search engine group, they lean towards homeless engrams, the philanthropy topic, probably influenced by, popular search results, SEO-optimized content about charity.
Right, what bubbles up on Google.
Exactly. And the brain-only group, as you'd expect, highly diverse anagrams, reflecting more unique thoughts and specific, personally meaningful phrases like true happy or benefit other.
That's a critical point, though. If the AI generates based on most probable outputs and search engines push optimized content, what does this mean for echo chambers, where we only see stuff that confirms what we already think?
It raises a really important question about how we get information, because unlike traditional search, which at least can present diverse links, LLMs often give you one synthesized answer.
A single voice.
Right. And the study found these LLM systems might actually exacerbate selective exposure compared to conventional search because they optimize for that most probable output, potentially hiding alternative views.
And search engines have their own issues.
Oh yeah, the search engine group was definitely prone to those filter bubbles too. So both tools, just in different ways, can kind of narrow your information landscape.
That's a profound point. It goes way beyond just writing an essay. So given these distinct linguistic fingerprints left by the tools, how did the essays actually stack up when they were graded? And could anyone tell who or what wrote them?
They used both an AI judge, basically another algorithm, and human teachers to evaluate the essays.
Okay, AI versus human.
And the AI judge consistently scored essays higher, especially on uniqueness and quality, which tells you AI judges might value different things than humans do.
Interesting. What did the humans think?
The human teachers who, let's face it, are seeing more and more AI writing in their work.
They're on the front lines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were much more skeptical about the uniqueness of the structure of the content. They described the essays they suspected were AI generated as, well, soulless.
Soulless. Ouch.
Yeah. Lacking personal nuances, using standard ideas, reoccurring typical formulations, just very generic.
Could they definitively spot the AI?
They could recognize a distinctive AI style, often regardless of the topic. And they could even sometimes identify consistent stylistic things from the same participant's own background or experience stuff the AI judge totally missed.
So the humans picked up on human inconsistencies almost.
In a way, yeah. The AI judge flagged almost half the essays as likely AI generated. The human teachers couldn't always pinpoint it exactly like that, but they definitely recognized the hallmarks. They knew something was off.
Okay, we've heard what people said, what the essays showed, but the really deep insights, I think, often come from looking inside the black box, the brain itself. What did the EEG results actually reveal about the cognitive load, the engagement, when using these different tools? This is where it gets really fascinating for me.
Right, the EEG analysis. It provided really robust evidence that these different ways of writing produce clearly different patterns of neural connectivity, basically different cognitive strategies being used.
And what was the overall pattern?
Strikingly clear. Brain connectivity systematically scaled down with the amount of external support being used.
Scaled down, meaning less activity.
Less extensive connectivity, yeah. So the brain-only group, they showed the strongest, widest ranging networks, the highest total connectivity across key brainwave bands, alpha, theta, and delta.
What are those linked to?
Think of those as the brain's deep work modes. Internal attention, pulling up memories, semantic processing, working memory, executive control, creative brainstorming.
Heavy lifting.
Exactly. Their brains were showing much more internally driven processing, high cognitive load, deep engagement in generating their own content, planning it out, revising it.
Okay, so that's the baseline, the brain working hard on its own. What about the LLM group?
The opposite end of the spectrum. They showed the least extensive connectivity, up to 55% reduced activity compared to the brain-only group in some of those key low-frequency networks involved in semantics and monitoring your own work.
55% reduction, that's huge.
It is. It suggests a much lower working memory burden. They were effectively offloading a significant chunk of the cognitive work to the tool.
Which might make it feel easier.
Right, streamlines the process, makes it feel less effortful. But the downside seems to be that it diminishes the brain's engagement in those deep, creative, generative processes. Their brain activity kind of shifted away from the patterns that underpin organizing your own ideas, reasoning things through yourself.
And the search engine group, presumably somewhere in the middle.
Exactly. Intermediate engagement. About 34–48% lower total connectivity than the brain-only group. Their brain activity showed a shift, using resources more for handling the external information, visual attention, scrolling, processing search results. It looked like a hybrid strategy, managing incoming visual info while still doing some internal regulation.
Okay, this is where that idea of cognitive debt really starts to make sense neurologically, especially thinking about session 4 when they switched tools. What happened in the brains of the brain to LLM and LLM to brain groups then?
Yeah, this is critical for understanding how we adapt and the potential long-term effects. So the brain to LLM group, remember, they wrote on their own first, then used the LLM in session 4. Their brains showed higher neural connectivity in session 4 compared to the original LLM group's typical sessions.
Higher, even though they were now using the AI assistant.
Yeah. It suggests that rewriting or editing using AI tools after you've already done the initial deep thinking yourself actually engages more extensive brain networks. Maybe it's the novelty or the cognitive load of trying to integrate the AI suggestions with their own already formed knowledge.
Okay, that's interesting. What about the other group, the ones who lost the AI LLM to brain?
They demonstrated less coordinated neural effort in most brainwaves bands compared to the typical brain-only sessions. And importantly, their connectivity didn't just reset to how a novice writer might look.
So they didn't bounce back to the brain-only levels.
No, and they didn't look like first-timers either. Their connectivity didn't reach the peak levels seen in the experienced brain-only group. This strongly suggests that prior reliance on the LLM might lead to, well, skill atrophy maybe, or at least reduced engagement in those self-driven, analytical, and generative parts of writing when the AI crutch is suddenly removed.
Their brains didn't just seamlessly pick up the slack.
It seems not. The adaptation wasn't immediate or complete.
So let me see if I'm getting this right. Using AI might make the task feel easier because you're offloading that cognitive work.
Right. Less connectivity, less perceived effort.
But the trade-off might be that your brain isn't diving as deep into those rich associative processes that unassisted creative writing seems to demand.
That seems to be what the data suggests.
And if you consistently skip developing your own strategies for organizing thoughts, structuring arguments, finding words because the AI does it for you, then those specific brain circuits might not get the workout they need to strengthen.
Precisely.
Leaving you potentially less equipped, less fluent when you don't have the AI available.
That's the concern. The neurophysiological data gives us some initial concrete support for that idea. It shows these changes in brain connectivity that mirror the behavioral shifts. AI-assisted revisions just might not stimulate the brain in the same way, potentially leading to what they called a second-hand effort, when you have to tackle the task independently later. Your brain learns to be a bit more passive in certain ways.
Wow, this is huge. Huge for anyone who learns, who creates, who teaches, or even just, wants to stay mentally sharp. What are the broader implications here for education, for cognitive development, for how we interact with information now?
Well, zooming out, the study really highlights this fundamental trade-off, doesn't it? AI tools undeniably offer efficiency. They can support performance on a task.
Get the job done faster.
Right. But they might unintentionally hinder that deep cognitive processing, the long-term retention, the authentic engagement with the material. And this can lead to that cognitive debt the researchers talk about.
Explain that concept again, cognitive debt.
It's where repeated reliance on these external systems replaces the effortful internal cognitive processes that are really required for independent thinking, for deep learning. You defer the mental effort now.
Because the tool makes it easy.
Exactly. But that results in potential long-term costs. Things like diminished critical inquiry skills, maybe increased vulnerability to misinformation or manipulation because you're not thinking as critically, and potentially decreased creativity over time.
So it's not just about getting the essay done today, it's about what skills you're not building or maybe even letting degrade for tomorrow.
That's the core issue. That fragmented sense of ownership we talked about, the impaired memory recall among the LLM users, the reduced self-monitoring seen in the brain activity. It all suggests this kind of psychological dissociation from your own output when you rely heavily on AI.
So what does this suggest for education? Should we ban these tools?
Well, the study doesn't necessarily say ban them entirely, but it does seem to support an educational approach that maybe delays integrating AI tools, especially for foundational tasks like writing.
Until when?
Until learners have had sufficient chance to engage in that self-driven cognitive effort first. Build the foundational skills, the mental muscles, promote that lasting cognitive autonomy before introducing tools that might short-circuit the process.
Build the muscles before you use the exoskeleton, maybe.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
And beyond the cognitive side, the study touched on something else, rarely considered but increasingly relevant, the environmental cost.
That's right. It's a brief point in the study, but an important one for the bigger picture. They note that an LLM query, like asking ChatGPT something, consumes roughly 10 times more energy than a traditional web search query.
10 times.
Yeah. So there's a real material environmental cost to this computational heavy lifting that we need to consider alongside the cognitive costs. Every interaction has an energy footprint.
Wow. Cognitive debt and an energy cost. What an illuminating deep dive this has been.
It's fascinating stuff.
You've heard how using these AI tools like ChatGPT for tasks like writing essays can really profoundly affect your brain's activity, your memory, even how much you feel you own your work. The convenience is undeniable. We all feel it. But it really does seem to come with this potential cognitive debt.
Which leaves us and you with a really important question to consider, doesn't it? What are we truly learning when we increasingly offload our thinking processes to machines? And maybe more importantly, what fundamental human skills, critical thinking, deep memory, creative synthesis might we be silently letting atrophy along the way, both as individuals and maybe collectively as a society in this pursuit of effortless output?
Food for thought indeed. A lot to mull over there.